let's waste no more time and get to tasting, shall we? So first up, we have the Kirin Light. Not expecting a ton, but you never know. Looks like beer, very pale. Doesn't smell like anything. You know, I will say, and I'm trying to think back on the light beers that I've had in the past on this channel. This isn't the worst light beer that I had. And if I ever did light beer taste test, which I really don't want to do, but maybe I will, I wonder how this would compare to other light beers, but you know, obviously it's very nondescript, it has very little flavor, but the one thing I will give it is it doesn't have any off-putting undertones to it, and it has at least the acceptable body of beer, as in it doesn't taste watery, it just has basically no flavor. Next up is Kirin Ichiban. Yeah, pretty much has the exact same color as the Kirin Light. Smells about the same, really. You know, to be honest, I don't love that. I'm trying to think kind of what the best way to describe this. And I think what it is that the grain-based malt in this, it's almost like cloyingly too much. And I get cloyingly is usually a term used which describes sweet things, but it's sort of like that where it just kind of sits on my palate in the form of, it's just a regular lager beer, but it kind of just sits on the palate when you finish drinking it, and not in a particularly great way. It's still fine. It's not like any of those, like the PTSD flashbacks from the Corona Light episode, or Corona Light beer. But it's fine, but it's not, in terms of a lager that I'm particularly fond of, it's not super high on the list. Yeah, that's what it is. There's something a little bit kind of off for me with the malt. There's just this sort of, yeah, almost cloyingly, vaguely almost sour sort of mix of things with the malt that's not really doing it for me. Third, we have finally Asahi Super Dry. Pretty much same color as all. These all have pretty much the exact same color. Not much. Now it basically smells like a lager. That is a dry lager. That's interesting. I find that kind of an interesting flavor, actually. And I mean, let's be clear, this is still in the range of a lager beer. This is not some sort of amazingly, completely out of this world lager that you'll try and you'll just think this is the best lager I've ever had. It is kind of interesting, and it's got a reasonably unique flavor profile, I would say, for a lager. And I would say that this idea of karakuchi, of dryness, but not a sort of super hoppy IPA dryness. It's a very soft dryness. Yeah, I really like the smooth dryness in this. It's quite nice. It's quite nice, and it's very particular to this lager. So we've done Asahi 1 of 2. Now let's try Asahi 2 of 2. The most recent beer. Let's see here. Yeah, this is, well, it's definitely a dark beer. This is close to opaque. I mean, if I weren't holding this in front of a major direct light source where there's just a tiny little bit of light getting through this thing, on a table, it's, yeah, pretty much, except for the very bottom, it is basically black. So anyway, let's give it a try. It doesn't smell like much though, and actually it smells like maybe a little bit less than the regular Asahi. Well, it's certainly fine, and I can see that it's sort of, is a little bit of a mix of those notes of the Asahi Super Dry with a hint of a sort of roasted malty mix to it. I don't know, I mean, there's just something about it where, you know what I think it is? I might have to take another taste, but that unique dry flavor profile that's blended very nicely with a light body isn't coming through here quite as strongly. It feels like the basic notes of Asahi, but it's all been taken down a little bit, and then you've upped a little tiny bit of sort of a roasted dark sort of malty flavor, but very, very little. I will give it smoothness points. It is in some ways smoother than the Asahi Super Dry, but overall it has less flavor, or at least less of an interesting or unique flavor profile. It's more, as I said, sort of Asahi Super Dry just dialed back maybe 20% in terms of flavor, with then an increase of maybe, I don't know, 10% or so in sort of, you know, dark, kind of vaguely roasted malty flavors, but very, very faint roasted malty flavors. So certainly not bad in any sense of the word, completely drinkable. Someone gave me one, I'd say sure, why not? But I think relative to the classic, it's not going to beat out the classic. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so we're done. We reviewed Asahi and Kirin. But you know, I figured when talking about major beer producers in Japan, why not bring back an old friend from season 1, Sapporo, and just let's see how this stacks up against the 4 that we've already got on the table. All right, so this is a beer that, as I said, in Japan actually is the smallest beer producer in terms of market share, but I from what I've seen in stores and restaurants, I feel that this is the beer that has a much larger kind of export footprint. So yeah, it's sort of got that sharp note, I remember. Try it out. So yeah, you know, this is just like what I remember when I had it in season 1. That how I would describe this lager is sharp. It's a very specific flavor that I associate. Originally I thought it was sort of East Asian, a lot of East Asian lagers in general, but I think it's Sapporo specifically, and maybe a couple other beers from East Asia, where it's a lager that's got this very just sharp note to it. It's not sour, it's not, you know, unpleasant or tangy or anything like that. And it's not really crisp, but it's just a very peculiar, or I should say particular, not peculiar, but particular note that I think of with sort of Japanese beer that I don't get in the beer from other parts of the world, like, you know, Europe, United States, Latin America. You don't get that sharpness in the beer. And you know, it's perfectly fine as a lager. I mean, this is a perfectly fine beer. It's a good table beer to have, especially with a meal. It's definitely clean, it's refreshing, and you know, it pairs perfectly well with food. I don't know, again, I wouldn't say the flavor profile is quite as unique as the Asahi Super Dry, but it's perfectly enjoyable. In conclusion, in last place, we've got Kirin Light. For a light beer, I would say this is actually reasonably okay, but compared to regular lagers, this is not going to stack up. After that, we've got Kirin Ichiban. This is definitely the least enjoyable of the beers I tried here, of sort of the proper lagers. It's got that not particularly pleasant aftertaste of beers that I think of as being not of the highest quality. That sort of, you know, kind of almost sourness, and it's not, I don't want to say it's maybe watery, but it's not that well crafted. It's fine. This would be in the category, I think I used references in the Heineken episode. If I were stuck on a deserted island and there were no other beers available other than just sort of light beers, and this was the only proper lager available, I would go with this, or in, you know, in any other situation where you just are out of options. It's like, we got this or we got, you know, the light beer. I'd say, okay, fine, give me this one, but that's really about it. After that, we get into the beers that I think are perfectly fine to very nice. The Asahi Black is perfectly good. It's perfectly fine. It's not incredible. It's a dark lager that has some of the dryness of Asahi. Overall, though, the flavors are more muted on this. The body's, acceptable. It's not watery in any sense of the word. It's sort of an acceptably bodied, middle of the road sort of lager beer. It's just darker colored, so there's going to be a little bit of roasted malt flavor, but it's very, very, very slight. So that's about what you're getting. You're getting a 20% reduction on the Asahi Super Dry flavor, and then a little bit of roasted malt. Sapporo, perfectly fine. It's got that sharp flavor. It's a sharp, clean sort of lager. Works perfectly well with a variety of foods. And then I gotta give it to, in first place, Asahi Super Dry. Having tasted all of these, I can see why this one sort of revolutionized the Japanese beer market in the late 80s, early 90s. I love the fact that it's this very light beer, not in the sense of light beer, but light-bodied beer, very sort of airy almost, with this very unique and interesting dry, karakuchi flavor that's worked into the beer, and it makes it a very pleasurable drinking experience. Everything's very, very light and soft, but dry rather than malty. As always, thanks for watching. If you want to go ahead and leave a comment, like the video, maybe even be adventurous and subscribe, please feel free to do so. It just costs you a few seconds, and it really helps us out. And I will see you next time.